Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Jeanette Southwood. I am the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at Engineers Canada, and I'm an engineer. My pronouns are she, her, elle. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to today's webinar as we kick off National Engineering Month 2025. Before we begin today, I'd like to introduce Randy Herman, who will start us off with a land acknowledgement. Randy is an engineer and is the chair of Engineers Canada's Indigenous Advisory Committee, which advises Engineers Canada on its work towards truth and reconciliation. Randy is also the director of the Engineering Access Program at the University of Manitoba, a support program designed to assist First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students seeking an engineering degree. Randy, over to you.
Thank you, Jeanette. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their culture. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the effect of residential schools and colonialism on Indigenous families and communities, and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you. Jeanette, back to you.
Thank you very much, Randy. I'd like to begin today's event by telling you a bit about Engineers Canada. Engineers Canada is the National Association of the provincial and territorial engineering regulators who license the more than 300,000 members of the engineering profession in Canada. We are the only national voice of the engineering profession. One of our core purposes is to foster recognition of the value and contribution of the profession to society, and to spark the interest of the next generation of engineering professionals. To that end, each year in March, Engineers Canada presents National Engineering Month. National Engineering Month is an annual celebration of the heart and soul of engineers, our passion, commitment, and action toward making the world a better place. Engineers open doors to new possibilities and new futures. They drive innovation and progress, taking what's come before them and making it better. Engineers bring people together and they inspire. And this March, engineers are inviting you in. On the occasion of National Engineering Month 2025, we are pleased to be partnering with Engineering Deans Canada to present a new theme for the month, Engineers Open Doors. Discover the difference that engineers make in their communities through a series of doors open events at higher education institutions and participating engineering companies and industry organizations. In addition to our new theme, 2025 marks a milestone year for the engineering profession for another reason, the 100th anniversary of the calling of an engineer, where engineering graduates receive their iron rings. A valued symbol for many engineering graduates, the iron ring is an ever-present reminder of the commitment engineers make to serving the public with integrity and ethics. A couple of years ago, we saw calls for changes to the obligation ceremony, calls to make it more welcoming and inclusive for everyone, calls to modernize it for today's society. Next month, the Corporation of the Seven Wardens will be unveiling a modernized ceremony. As we kick off National Engineering Month 2025, we wanted to host a discussion about the anniversary of the Iron Ring and the new ceremony. Today, we present to you that discussion. The panelists gathered a few weeks ago to record the conversation you're about to hear, and they're here today to take your questions after the discussion. So let's jump right in. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Adrian Harewood. Adrian is an associate professor of journalism and communications at Carleton University and has been a journalist for over a quarter century. He was the host of CBC Ottawa's Drive Home radio show, All in a Day, for 3 years, and then the anchor of CBC Ottawa News at 6 for 13 years. Currently, Adrian teaches the video journalism course and the fourth-year course, Journalism, Now and Next, at Carleton University, where he created the journalism school's first ever course focused on race, a graduate seminar called Journalism, Race and Diversity. He also created the first course in Canada devoted to the history and the study of the history of Black Canadian journalism. He is a board member of Journalists for Human Rights. Over to you, Adrian.
Well, thanks so much, Jeanette. March, of course, is National Engineering Month in Canada, an annual opportunity for us to celebrate the engineering profession and all that engineers from coast to coast to coast contribute to Canadian society every day and every month of the year. Today, we're going backwards to go forward. We're going to reflect on engineering's history in Canada so we can talk about engineering's dynamic present and bright future. 2025 marks the 100th anniversary of a Canadian engineering institution. The calling of an engineer, also known as the obligation ceremony, took place for the first time in Montreal in April 1925. The idea for a ceremony in which engineering grads would take an ethical obligation was conceived in 1922 by H.E.T. Halton, an esteemed professor of mining engineering at the University of Toronto. Halton's intention was to raise the consciousness of newly minted professional engineers entering the workforce of engineering's social significance. Halton wanted the ceremony to be a symbol and a reminder of the obligations and ethics associated with the engineering profession. The calling of an engineer was supposed to be both an expression of pride in the profession and deep humility. The text of the calling was written by the celebrated English poet Rudyard Kipling at Halton's request. It spoke of the responsibilities of the engineer, the need for engineers to maintain their integrity and resist compromising their work despite, quote, external pressures. For decades now, engineers have recited their obligation at the obligation ceremony, committing themselves to maintaining a high standard of ethical engineering practice. And yet, over time, criticisms emerged about the ceremony. Numerous voices called for changes to the ceremony to bring it into the 21st century. Some argued that engineers must recognize Canada's colonial history, and that the Iron Ring ceremony itself needed to confront the fact that it too had contained harmful and destructive worldviews, and thus needed to be revised and reimagined. Well, after 2 years of consultations, the Corporation of the Seven Wardens revised the ceremony, which was established 100 years ago now, calling it the calling of an engineer. The modernized, updated ceremony for new Canadian engineers keeps traditional elements of the ceremony, like the obligation and the presentation of iron rings to candidates, while, quote, embedding them in a modernized narrative, emphasizing the origins and history of the ceremony, the values being promoted, and the relevance to modern engineering. Key changes include territorial acknowledgements, expanded historical context, distinct English and French texts, and the removal of religious references. Joining me to answer questions sent to us by engineering students and young professionals from across Canada about the updated calling of an engineer are three distinguished Canadian engineering leaders. Paul Mann is the CEO and Registrar of Engineers Nova Scotia. Leonard Shara is the Chief Warden of the Corporation of the Seven Wardens, the organization responsible for the calling of an engineer ceremony. And Mary Wells is the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Waterloo. Welcome to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Adrian.
I think we're just going to begin this way. Can you speak to how the oath of an engineer to perform ethical work has evolved over the last 100 years and or decades in response to how the profession and society has evolved?
I'll be happy to address that, Adrian. I think the simple fact that something written 100 years ago is still alive and well in an altered form today speaks to the values that were originally there to cause it to come into being. The actual oath and obligation, or it's actually being renamed an obligation from an oath, is really all about what one is going to do to help and promote goodwill in society, to promote proper engineering practices, to never pass bad workmanship or bad materials, to support one's colleagues, and to be a good person. It's really all about values, morals, and ethics. So it has evolved in the sense that there are no references to gender or any religious type connections that were there originally, because 100 years ago, the world was a very different place, of course. So I would like to say that the morals, values, and ethics upon which the oath is based is very much alive and well today. But it has been updated to recognize the completely different Canada and society that we are in today in terms of multicultural, multi-ethnic, and obviously different worldview of how engineering fits into society today.
Mary, from your vantage point as the head of one of the top engineering schools in North America, can you kind of weigh in on this and talk about the evolution?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Adrian. And thank you for mentioning that we are one of the top in North America and one of the top in the world. So, and I will say that I'm also the chair of Engineering Deans Canada, which is an organization that kind of represents all the engineering deans across the country. And, you know, as an engineer who graduated about 35 years ago from McGill, I often go back and touch my ring to remind me of that obligation at moments in time where I feel I have a very difficult decision to make, and to remind me of what is at the core of having the ring. And it's not just a symbol of professional achievement from my perspective, although I know many of our engineering students, it's almost a ceremony that is more important than convocation, I would say, in terms of receiving of their iron ring. But it is really that reminder of our ethical obligation to the public. And you know, that's what we should be focused on as we, you know, go about making decisions. But I'm just so excited and pleased about this anniversary and all the work that Leonard and the 7 wardens have done to modernize the ceremony. It was definitely something that was overdue, I would say. And this is a ceremony that still resonates very, very deeply with our engineering students. And I think it is so important to have this ethical obligation to the work that we do, and most importantly to the public, to help us build trust in the technologies that we design and develop and build, that is for the betterment of society and for all life on the planet, I would say. And so it's just so intertwined. We're very different from scientists because really engineers take those scientific principles and we do build things that interface with society. So it's critical that we continue to develop trust with society, that they trust the technologies that we design and develop, and that we earn that public trust over time. And so I think it's just part of that, and that kind of visual, physical reminder of that obligation and that where we should focus our attention. So I'm just so excited about the new ceremony. I know our engineering students are really looking forward to it this year. And in fact, I will be going to the Waterloo ceremony on February 8th, so I will get a chance to see it firsthand myself for the very first time.
And Mary, for those young people, because there are many young people who are watching us right now, when you say that when you look at your finger, you know,
Right,
and
my
you look at that,
pinky.
when you look at that, well, yeah, it's right there. But when you look at
Right
that
there.
ring, it reminds you of your ethical obligations. Can you spell out some of those ethical obligations? Like what are they, and how does that inform the work that engineers do on a daily basis?
Well, I must say, I don't remember the full obligation, but I understand the kind of macro concepts around it, that that I should be, first of all, as engineers, that we are filled with humility and that we don't begin to believe that we are more powerful than that we are. And we should always question the work that we do to make sure that we haven't made a mistake. And that's part of being an engineer, because, you know, if a doctor makes a mistake, one life may be lost. But if an engineer makes a mistake, hundreds and hundreds of lives could be lost. So it's to remind ourselves of the enormity of the work that we do and the deep deep responsibilities we have associated with that work, and that it's very serious and we need to take it very seriously. And for myself, and I think, it is that obligation always to the public above all else. And so that, for example, we can't be bought by other people, and that where our morals have to lie in terms of complex and difficult decision making, so that we can never, ever compromise on quality because of that obligation we have to the public. And I just think, again, it is so important that we do that, especially in this day and age where technology is so pervasive in everything we do. And it is so important that we continue to build trust with society and that they trust the technologies that we're building. And I must say, as a country, by and large, the technologies that are designed and developed in Canada are trusted not only by Canadians, but by the world. And I really think this is a brand we could double down on in the future.
Hal, same question to you. How do you see the evolution over these past 100 years?
It's a fantastic question. In preparation for today, you sort of go back and you look at some of the history and you do some of the reading on there. So the fundamentals of engineering haven't changed from the time this symbol was created and the ceremony was produced. Engineers use their knowledge, they use their skill for the betterment of society. So when you look at the root of where we developed this ceremony, the principles that drove that development are the same today, because we work for the betterment of society by using our knowledge and our skills to do so. What's been interesting is watching the evolution of society in the time from the ring has been formed. And I think as part of what Mary has said and what Len have said, a large part of our credibility as a profession is the social license that we hold, the respect and trust that the public has in us to do our work to the best of our ability, and also to support them in their lives. So when you look at who we serve, you would think that our ceremonies and our reminder of what that obligation is should also reflect the society that we serve. So I see this as just a natural evolution, as we've seen in any sort of Darwinian concept. If you want to stay relevant, you need to evolve. And so I see this ring, the way the seven wardens have looked at the ceremony as a natural thing that would happen or should happen. So I'm really pleased to see how it's gone forward.
And I would imagine also that there's something very heartening about belonging to a community, that knowing that you have people who will support you, people who have been there before. I would imagine that also adds to the joy that one feels when going through a ceremony like this, Pal.
Yeah, I would say, I've had the privilege of giving my son his iron ring in 2017 when he graduated from Queen's. And as I looked around that room at all the young people who were receiving their rings, first of all, there's the pride that they have in having completed, a very tough program to get to where they are. But as I looked around the room at the engineers who were, in essence, passing a torch of some degree, watching that next generation who has taken the same diligence and the same effort to reach the point that they're at, reminds you a little bit of what you went through as well. So I think as I looked in that Queen's ceremony in 2017, there were a few engineers, students that didn't have family to give them rings. So I felt a very sort of parental feeling as I gave them their ring as they looked around for someone to support them.
Okay.
That's great, Kyle. I have to say, just to support that, I have bestowed the ring upon hundreds of candidates in my travels across the country to various ceremonies. Never gets old. In fact, it's exciting and brings a tear to my eye every time because of exactly what you just said, where often a family relative or a friend or a professor to whom the candidate became very close to gives them the ring. And then everyone is, posing with great pride all together, putting their finger out and all to show and to show off really this great accomplishment. But what it symbolizes is the most important thing of all. Yes, the many years of hard work that it took to get to the point where you earn the ring and earn the right to make that obligation. But then that's just the very start, of course, of one's career and where it'll go from there. But it's a wonderful event. It's a wonderful thing to strive for. And you know, if anyone out there is hoping to earn a ring someday, yes, it's worth it. That much I can say for sure.
I might just add, I will be leaving my daughter her ring this year, March 21st. She's at McMaster, graduating in civil engineering. So I'm looking forward to it. And, you know, as you said, Pal, it's kind of the passing of the baton to the next generation that will take on the work that you've done throughout your life, really.
So Engineers Canada received a number of questions from engineering students from across the country, also early career engineers and other members of the engineering community. Let's go to the first question now.
Hi, my name is Noah Wyman. I'm a recent civil engineering graduate. In my Iron Ring ceremony last year, I was really moved to see the ways in which the obligation we took aligned with the modern engineering ethics I had learned about in classes. The core of what we're agreeing to uphold as engineers, to use this education that we've been so fortunate to receive for the betterment of the world, is really the same now as it was 100 years ago. There are also some important values we think about now, though, that weren't included in terms of the environment, EDI, or even issues we face when it comes to modern technology. What do you think are the most important values that this new ceremony can emphasize for the next 100 years that the old one might have missed?
Leonard?
Well, I would say that the original ceremony, as written, addressed the very core of one's work, to do the best one can for society, to not pass bad workmanship or bad materials, to support fellow engineers in their work. Basically, to do the best you can, and do that every day, all of the time. And, you know, if you get up in the morning with that intention of doing the best you can, no matter in what field you are, you're going to be better for it and feel really good about yourself. How things have evolved, of course, is that there are so many new fields of engineering today than there were 100 years ago. And it was all about civil engineering or mining engineering, building bridges and buildings and dams and such. Today we have, of course, biomedical and aerospace, computer science, so many different ways that engineers can interact and ultimately better society. So the new ceremony takes into account the new different kinds of engineering that are there, as well our awareness of the differences in society that are today, our awareness of the importance of protecting the environment, of acknowledging that we have come all this way and perhaps made mistakes along the way in terms of how perhaps the land or some people living on the land were treated. So all of these things are now in our awareness and have been incorporated into the new ceremony. We've invited authors and poets, contributors from all walks of Canadian society to lend their voice to the new ceremony in various paragraphs or sections that have been included. So all of these things, I think, make this a great new updated ceremony, while at the same time maintaining the wonderful traditions of 100 years ago.
How?
Yeah, you know, when I look at the fundamentals of the ceremony right now, we've kept the the bones that really speak to what it is we are confirming in that moral and ethical pillar. One of the pillars that's needed to eventually earn your license as a professional engineer. I think when some of the things that this exercise that we've just completed is really shown the importance of transparency in the process as well. If you go on the internet, YouTube, in the past, you would see the secret ceremony of the engineers shrouded in secrecy, which may have been a sort of a comic book feeling of the secret society, but in terms of actually educating the public of the value that engineers bring to society, I don't think it served the purpose there. The new ceremony that we have and how we're informing people, inviting family and friends to the ceremony, really is also emphasizing to our society at large, our community at large, what it is that we are now undertaking on their behalf. I think when you look at the ceremony as it's been retooled right now, the different voices that we've had to provide their input and help us shape the way it is gone a long way to perhaps address or recognize some of the harms that engineering has done in the past, and not intentionally, but in policies, public policy. I can speak right here in Halifax, Africville, one of the communities here that was appropriated for construction of the Harbour Bridges, which is a major engineering project here in Nova Scotia. It was done for the betterment of the public at large, but there were ways it could have been done better. So I think this modernization is just a recognition that we are still doing the same job, but we're doing it in a different environment, and we're much more cognizant of how we need to communicate what we're doing with the public.
Mary, the classroom that you see, or the classrooms that you see every day in Waterloo, at Waterloo, would be unrecognizable to someone from 1925. Just yes. The composition. There's been a huge demographic shift in this country and in engineering over the last 100 years. How does that factor into the way in which, or how should that be informing our practices? Yeah, no, it's a great point that you've made. And I think, when I think 100 years ago, Len already touched on the fact that the type of engineering we did 100 years ago, predominantly civil engineering, maybe mining engineering, military engineering, that has evolved significantly to the kinds of engineering we do today and the pervasiveness of engineering and technology in our society. And I mean, I must admit, when I see the students and I see the hope and optimism in them and the diversity of our student body, and diversity in all senses of that word, whether it be gender diversity, ethnic diversity, it gives me great hope for the future. And I think Canada is a country that should be celebrated, and we should feel very proud that it has always embraced multiculturalism. And I think it's only now that we're really appreciating the importance of multiculturalism, in particular in engineering, because of the importance and power of having a range of lived experiences and perspectives as you design products to be used by society. Because if you just have everybody having one perspective, clearly they will design something that is relative to their own lived experience. So I think the way we approach engaging with stakeholders and thinking about design has evolved tremendously over the 100 years. And I love what I see. I love how the students are embracing this idea of co-creation, of stakeholder engagement, as they think about developing, designing products and processes that will be useful not only for humans, and we talk about human-centered design, but I really like to talk to our students now about broadening that perspective from human-centered design to what I would call life-centered design, so that it not only encompasses the humans in our world, but all life, whether that be our natural world, our animal species, and things like that, because and I think these were perspectives that we didn't even think about 100 years ago. And part of that has to do with the nature of the technology back then as being predominantly infrastructure and
maybe more distal to the human experience, whereas today it is so connected to our human experience in terms of how we communicate with each other, in terms of the maybe negative consequences we have had both on the natural world, on our species of planets, our biodiversity and things, and the unintentional things that have happened. And, I think it really speaks to, maybe from my perspective as an educational leader, how do we need to educate engineers differently in the future because of the complexity and the interconnectedness of our world and technologies in our world, and that I no longer need engineers that can only think about, can we make this technologies, but also be able to answer the question, should we make these technologies, or what are the unintentional consequences that could be imparted on society by developing and unleashing a technology on society where it's not just the primary focus you were hoping to do, but all the unintended consequences. So it does, speak to both the depth of technical knowledge that the engineers need to have, but also the breadth of knowledge and their ability to work across boundaries with other disciplines to really better understand the impact it will have on society and more broadly the world.
So given all these changes that have been going on in the society, going on in engineering schools, what then are those values that really should be emphasized within this new ceremony, the ceremony of the 21st century?
Well, I think, as Len said, and I think Pal said too, it really goes back to the roots of, the original ceremony. And I think that, I really think the 7 wardens in all their consultation process, and I would say co-creation of the new modernized ceremony, have struck the right balance between some of the traditions and the roots of the ceremony. And those really haven't changed. Our obligation to society, the need to develop and earn trust in society, our commitment to doing high quality of work, our commitment to each other, those are all the same, but we've taken some of those things and modernized it. And I think, in terms of the educational experience students have, it's quite different today than it was in the past. And they do need to better appreciate the impact of their work on society and the different aspects of society tenets, whether it be the human population, our natural world, the animals, the plants, and there's a much better and deeper appreciation for that than I think maybe in the past. Even 35 years ago when I was educated as an engineer, to be honest, we rarely talked about the adverse effects on the environment the way we were taught. We really just focused on the technology. Can we do it? And we didn't really talk about that, whereas today that's an integral part of how we educate engineers.
Yeah, Adrian, when you think about what it is that the ring represents, or what we're expecting ring wearers to, how do we expect them to live their professional lives? The professional responsibility. Most of the aspects that the ring symbolizes are codified in the engineering license that come. So, as I said, the 3 pillars: the academic pillar, the moral and ethical pillar, and of course the experience are what are required to get your professional engineering license. But I think the ring is a physical manifestation, and the words that we use around the ceremony really serve as a reminder of the engineer's responsibility to hold paramount the health and the welfare of the public, really to protect the environment and to maintain high professional standards of conduct. Those are codified in most of the engineering regulatory in all the provinces and territories as part of their code of ethics. As Mary has said before, when she touches the ring to remind her of her ethical decision-making responsibilities, we put service before self. And that's one of the things that this ring is there to remind you, that sometimes we get caught of, oh, this is not good for me, I don't really want to do this, but you have to be reminded that you have to do it because it's for the betterment of the public. I think that when we look at all those things in play with some of the demands that we may see in modern life, where we're all about making money or we're all about the expedient fix, this is a constant reminder that that's not what engineering is about. Engineering is about fixing things, but fixing things not for self-gain or self-promotion. It's for the betterment of society and public.
engineering is about fixing things, but it's also about the economy, is it not? Like engineering plays a really significant role in allowing people to pay for their mortgages, or allowing people to send people to various schools, Queen's or McMaster. Is that something also, the role that engineering plays in the economy, that should be informing the ceremony in any particular way? Maybe I'm going to ask you to maybe address that question.
Okay, Adrian. Oh, sorry, you said me. Yes, no, I think that it is an outcome of the work that engineers do, absolutely. And I think there's been economic studies that show the connection between, the science and engineering activity you have in your country and the economic prosperity as measured by, GDP and things like that. So I don't think that it's one of the primary things we teach our students in terms of why we do engineering. We really focus on the betterment of society, and that our work will help improve society and help lead to a higher quality of life. But I think it's a natural outcome that if your country is very strong in technological development, inevitably it does lead to economic prosperity. And I think as a country, we have had some unbelievable engineers. We have been a leader in terms of technology development, whether it be on the communication side or many other areas, some aspects in mining. I'm a metallurgist by training, and I know in the steel industry, we were a world leader in terms of some of the technologies we developed that were then adopted around the world. So Canada, I believe, has always been a leader in kind of that ingenuity and technological development, and inevitably that will lead to economic prosperity. But when we teach our students, again, it comes down to, as Pal and Len have been saying, it's not driven by the creation of wealth. That is one of the outcomes. But as engineers, we always are driven by the betterment of society and holding strong to our ethic and moral values around doing work that is of high quality that will not adversely affect the public and that earning of the public trust.
Yeah, I'd just jump on to Mary's. It's an interesting. I think this has been debated a lot as well. What role do engineers have in that realm? And in a lot of the legislation across the country, engineers are required to work in the public interest. And public interest is a really interesting term when you think about, it's not just public safety, it's economic development, it's looking at community ties, it's looking at respecting the land, it's looking at taking care of equity deserving groups. So that public interest can be defined in lots of ways. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have, that decision makers and engineers may have different opinions of what public interest is. And I think that's one of the areas where engineers play a really important role in advising those that make the decisions, because sometimes engineers in a lot of companies or a lot of municipalities or at the government level provide advice to the decision makers. We need to look at the full context, and this ring reminds you, by your obligations, that you've got to consider a lot of things. Sometimes sometimes projects cost more because you're respecting other aspects of the public interest. Sometimes projects cost less and you have to accept some risks in other areas just because that's the only way the project can get done. So this is the sort of ethical decision making that gets tough, which is what the ring is there to remind you about.
Yes, Pal, that's very well stated. The whole notion that the economy hinges on, or one of the main drivers of the economy is, in modern days, in modern first world countries, certainly everywhere, is technology. And engineers take science and apply it to real world issues and problems and structures. That is technology. And there's a cost, naturally, to technology. And there's a cost to protecting the environment and to protecting communities that might be affected by different aspects of this new technology coming in, as well as the benefit. So all of these things are important to consider in terms of the economics of engineering. I think we're all in agreement that, technology and engineering are here to stay and really helping our world become a better place for most, hopefully. But we have to take in mind the cost to do this, allocate resources accordingly for that, so that whatever impacts are made on the environment and are perhaps made on communities, that these are properly managed as well. And these are some of the things I believe that are being taught today, which, as Mary mentioned, and I go back there too, none of this was really considered back then, let alone 100 years ago. So we've certainly evolved a lot in terms of our actual awareness of the importance of the holistic approach of looking at the entire ecosystem, and not just, well, we're going to build this bridge and how much cement will it take and how much steel. There's so much more that goes into all of these decisions today, and we're all better for it.
And now here's a question from another member of the engineering community.
Hello, my name is Connor Shai. I'm a professional engineer in the area of sustainability and renewable energy, and I currently represent the Engineers Canada Indigenous Advisory Committee. What process did the committee go through to challenge the status quo when revising the ceremony? How were marginalized and underrepresented voices included in the development process? And by extension, how will those voices shape what the ideal engineer is during the coming century?
Len.
I'll be happy to take up on that. An excellent question, really delving into the core of what we did and how we went about it, and to come up with what we have now and what we think is a wonderfully revised ceremony. We contacted all of the stakeholders that we could think of to provide input. So these were student bodies, engineering student bodies. These were the deans of engineering faculties across Canada. This was Engineering Canada and all the regulators, and all other interested parties, all of the wardens. There are over 600 wardens in the corporation, the 7 wardens, who are all volunteers, by the way, and they operate 28 sections, each one in a different city and community in Canada, where these ceremonies are held. So we had input, and then from the general public and from media. So we had a lot of input that came in. And then around 2 years ago at a plenary session in St. John's, Newfoundland, all of these ideas were really kicked around, and all kinds of brainstorming went on, and through some wonderful moderators and facilitators, we were able to distill down a lot of what came up into the core of what ultimately became this new ceremony. So, and after many revisions and after additional contacts with people like former astronaut Chris Hadfield, and a poet laureate of Edmonton, and authors in Quebec, there was just so much, I think, wonderful. Oh, and the Ganawagi Mohawk community. All of this wonderful input came in, and we were able to, I think, from all of this input, we were able to achieve, in our view, the best of really all worlds. So we took all of the new stuff that we could see and understand and appreciate, and also whatever traditional stuff from the ceremony that we could take and modify properly, mix it all together, and come up with this new ceremony. So we're very happy with the ultimate result.
Let's go to another submitted question.
My name is Carrie Zacharias. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Manitoba in our Department of Engineering Education, and a co-facilitator of the Retool the Ring group. Over the past 100 years, thousands of engineers have participated in the Iron Ring ceremony and recited the obligation, which affirms their commitment to ethical engineering practice. At the same time, we've seen countless engineers fail to engage ethically with Indigenous peoples and communities. In this context, how does the updated ceremony help engineers to recognize the truth of Canada's colonial history and support them in working towards conciliation or reconciliation with Indigenous peoples?
Len, again, I'm going to start with you.
Well, for starters, the actual originator of the idea of having an iron ring ceremony and an obligation ceremony occurred in the aftermath of a terrible disaster that occurred in 1907, the collapse of the Quebec Bridge. During that collapse, or just afterwards, of over 70 souls that were lost that day, half of them were from the Mohawk community in Ganawagi, just south of Montreal. This was a terrible loss for the community, as it was, of course, for the Quebec City vicinity and the entire engineering community of Canada. In the aftermath, many improvements and things were done, and ultimately the ceremony came to be. We realized that in the course of redoing the ceremony, that input from this community would be of value and a good lesson for all of us. And very fortunately, we did receive an input from the community, which we've incorporated into the new ceremony, describing how they were really the wardens of the land for the thousands of years prior, that when the opportunities came to work on projects of this nature, they did so for their own benefit, for the benefit of their community, their families, and in the aftermath, how it affected their community and what they did to compensate and to adjust so that this kind of terrible thing wouldn't happen again, in the sense of how it affected the community, how many widows and orphans were left behind, etc. So, and also moving forward, how they are happy to work with the modern stream of Canada in terms of stewardship of the land and moving forward in technological projects as well. So they've always been here. They were there at the original event, and then which really gave birth to the notion of the ceremony, and are willing and happy to participate as the country evolves technologically. So I think we've addressed as best we can, or at least from our perspective, a fair and balanced ear to this community and to all Indigenous peoples, really moving forward. That we are, when we say we're doing the best for society, we really mean all of society, not just the people who might be driving on that bridge.
How do you see, or what do you see as being the connection between the ceremony and reconciliation with Indigenous people?
Yeah, so, the truth and reconciliation is a very complex issue that we're all dealing with, and still have a long way to go to produce positive results, I think, that can mitigate the harm that's been done in the past. The actual task force or the group that worked on the ceremony made a very visible and strong effort to include Indigenous voices in coming up with the new ceremony. And I think the actual format that we use is inclusive for not just the Indigenous community, but any non-Christian beliefs. I'm a Sikh, and when I did my ceremony, there was no references to Guru Nanak in there. So, but it was just one of those interesting things that happens. I would say that raising awareness that truth and reconciliation still is required, and that we need to make efforts during our careers, not just it's not going to be fixed at the Iron Ring ceremony. The Iron Ring ceremony is going to remind us that we still have lots of work to do in truth and reconciliation. I think keeping that at the forefront, and as we go through our professional lives, there are still lots of opportunities, and we've done lots of work to become better at that. At the professional engineer level here at Engineers Canada leading the way, we've looked at a guideline for Indigenous consultation. I know that there's lots of learnings for continuing professional development to raise awareness of the issues that were raised during the commission. And in terms of learning or improving our ethical viewpoints and how we serve society, becoming more knowledgeable on what is required to reconcile the harms of the past is something that the Iron Ring sets the foundation for. And I think if people believe that the Iron Ring ceremony is going to correct all the harms that happened through colonialism or racism or sexism, no, it can't correct all those things, but it reminds us that we have work to do in all those areas. And that's what part of that ethical decision making and the ethical awareness that this ring promotes is there to foster.
Mary?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a slightly different perspective in terms of, again, educating the next generation of students that will go on to start their careers as engineers. And, I think we are now, through the Truth and Reconciliation, really appreciating the different perspectives and ways of knowing and approaches the Indigenous people can teach us. And so, and I think their connection to the land and to nature is so strong that we need to have our students be, and people generally, better connected to nature and more in harmony with what's going on, because we are using as engineers, we do take resources from the world to create the things that we are creating. And we have to have a better harmony and better appreciation for what that does. And I think this is something the Indigenous people can really bring to the approaches we take in how we design the structures and the technologies we're developing from maybe a different perspective of thinking about that and that connection to the land. If you think about in Canada, even young people growing up that might grow up in an urban area, they may lose that connection to nature. And how do we reestablish that? So, I know that I speak on behalf of my fellow deans, our commitment to integrating Indigenous ways of knowing and being and exposing our engineering students to those. And that's manifests itself in a variety of ways in our educational institutions. So at Waterloo, we have an elder in residence who's a professional architect and who can speak to our students a lot about design and how the Indigenous people approach design in a way that really maximize the use of the sun in terms of lighting, but also in terms of heat, and the way they use some of the natural materials more so than concrete and steel, so that at the end of life of the structure, it would then just go into a kind of organic matter type thing. So it's just bringing in, again, different perspectives in terms of materials use and the entire life cycle from beginning to end of what happens to those materials in our structures and how they can be used. So I think it's really wonderful.
We have now another question that was submitted from the engineering community.
Hi there. My name is Griffin Murdoch. I work for Hatch as a railway simulations specialist. Before that, or a ways before that, I was the president of the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students, or the CFES. The ring has huge importance culturally for engineers, especially for students who haven't even earned it yet. How do you see the role of the legal regulator in incorporating and managing the importance of the Iron Ring and the calling of the engineer?
Hal, perhaps we can begin with you.
It's a logical place to go, Adrian, I would say. So as we've mentioned before, or as I mentioned before, there's really three major aspects to becoming a professional engineer in Canada. One is obviously the academic foundation through the universities or other learning institutions to get that foundational knowledge that allows you to practice engineering. the experience part, as an engineer in training, obviously working under the supervision of a professional engineer who can take responsibility for your work and teach you the skills that you need to get licensed. And then there's that third piece that you will need throughout your career, as the moral and ethical component as well. When we look at the number of cases that the public may complain to an engineering regulator about an engineer who may not lived up to the expectations, the majority of them fall into that moral and ethical realm. There are technical challenges out there that need to be addressed, obviously, but the area that really a lot of the public will challenge an engineer on is, did they behave ethically and did they fulfill the obligations of the profession in that sense? So the Iron Ring ceremony, as I said, based on the learnings from the university, from the ethical courses that they take and the case studies they do, through to this visible manifestation through the Iron Ring of what the expectations are for them for ethical and moral behavior, is then set the foundation for them to follow the code of ethics that are then established to maintain the public trust, to maintain that social license, that the public will have confidence in the work that the engineering profession is doing on their behalf.
Here's another question we can go to.
Hi, my name is Bridget Patterson, and I graduated from the Sustainable Design Engineering program at the University of Prince Edward Island in May of 2024, and I'm currently working in electrical and automation engineering. Beyond the changes to the Iron Ring ceremony, what broader initiatives are being implemented at the academic level to create an inclusive and accessible environment for historically excluded groups in engineering?
Mary?
Yeah, no, really, really great question. And, again, I will say I graduated about 35 years ago from McGill. And, when I think back to what my class was like, it was very, very different from what we see today and would have been very, very different from what we saw 100 years ago. So, in my class at the time, we had probably about across the country, probably about 11% women. And in my class, there was one other woman. So in terms of the gender diversity, it wasn't very much. And there was still, because Canada was such a multicultural country, there were still some different ethnicities, which was wonderful and stuff. But when I look at the classes today, fast forward to 2025, it is so different. And it really is so heartwarming to see the diversity of people that want to dedicate their lives to engineering and their interest in it. And so we still have a ways to go in terms of women in engineering. We, as a country, we're probably at about 25% women. And, many people say, oh, we've made so little progress, but I would argue that is not the case, because when we look at some of our engineering disciplines like biomedical engineering, environmental engineering, we are at par, close to 50% or even higher in some of those disciplines. So it's not that women aren't choosing to study engineering or feel excluded. It's really the kinds of engineering that they are really attracted to are very specific. And they really focus in, from my experience, on those disciplines of engineering where they really see and feel and perceive they can make a real difference to society. And it's where the discipline itself and that connection to society is much more proximal than some others. For example, they don't tend to see that connection with mechanical engineering, and yet many of the things mechanical engineers do directly impact society, but maybe it's a little bit further removed, because you may be building, or designing cars and things like that. So although humans will use them, it's not as close. Whereas in biomedical engineering, the health of humans, the health of other things, you're much more closer to that. And so we've seen huge changes and huge advancements in the participation of women and the choice of women to study engineering and be able to see themselves as engineers. And I think as educational institutions, we've really focused on inclusion so that anybody that comes in to study engineering can be their authentic selves, does not feel they have to conform to a certain stereotype of what an engineer is or anything like that, but can bring their entire selves in and study, and then bring in their entire perspectives and things. And it just makes it much stronger as an experience, and much stronger in terms of the power of the designs and the diversity of the ideas that come forward for consideration.
I can certainly echo that, Mary. You know, when I graduated, there were 2 women in the entire faculty of engineering at McGill. When I look around today, when I'm speaking to various groups in the ceremonies that I'm privileged to attend, it's wonderful to see the amazing diversity, certainly reflecting in the kind of culture that is here in Canada now, but also the fact that there are so many more women in engineering. I would even add to what you were mentioning before, there's a big uptick in industrial engineering and chemical engineering, which is my field. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken to quite a few women about that. And they said, well, chemical today is about food and water, mm-hmm. and very much tied into the environment. And it's wonderful. These are just new technologies and opportunities that have come up that obviously have attracted women as well to the field. I think the idea that, you know, we're as inclusive a field of study as any is certainly there. Sure, it's STEM, it's science, technology, engineering, math, right? You have to know that kind of stuff to be an engineer, which doesn't attract everybody, of course. But I think the fact that it's encouraged now more and more at the grade school and high school levels as well, that this is a really interesting field of study, that this is the kind of stuff that you can do, that it's really not that hard if you apply yourself and you can learn calculus or whatever it is. These are good things to do, and then to be able to really affect your environment and affect the world, which you might not be able to do in other fields of study. So I think overall, we've come a long way that way, and all for the better.
Mary, do you want to maybe elaborate on that a little bit? Because, you know, throughout your career, you know, you have been a trailblazer, right? And you're part of a generation that was pushing against, you know, some pretty difficult forces. You know, we were actually at McGill at the same time, I'm realizing.
Oh, okay.
And in that year was a very, very difficult year. In 1989, 1990, you know, we saw the tragedy at École Polytechnique, where these young women who were striving to be engineers were cut down. It was devastating. So your generation really took up the torch of trying to kind of open up space. Are we where we need to be when it comes to ensuring that our young women have a place in our engineering offices, in our engineering schools?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, Adrian. And you're right. To be honest, when I was studying, we never talked about women in engineering. We were just people studying engineering. And it wasn't really till after the tragedy at École Polytechnique that really we did start to talk more and more about women in engineering. And I'd never even considered that I was a woman in engineering, to be honest. I just considered I was someone studying engineering, as was everybody else. I'd never even really thought about it at all, to be quite frank. And I don't know why, but I didn't. And so really that was a moment in time for me when I was in my early 20s thinking about, why is it that more women aren't studying engineering? Why did I choose to study engineering? And so I do think that tragedy really caused Canada and our profession to pause, to not just the women, but the men too, to think about that. And that was really the beginning of many, many of the programs around women in engineering. And federally, there was a big study done on women in STEM to see what was going on. And so I do believe that we've made significant progress. And I must say, I was so impressed with all the men that were totally behind wanting and encouraging more women to study engineering, and really understanding the value proposition of getting more women into the profession, and the value they would bring to the profession, and to making it a stronger profession. So are we where we should be? I mean, you know, will we get to 50-50? You know, one of the biggest issues right now still is in the high schools. Right now, to be able to even apply into engineering, you've got to take certain STEM courses in high school. The dreaded physics is the biggest problem across the country right now, where, across Ontario anyway, about 34% of the grade 12 students who study physics are women and the rest are men. And physics is not liked by anybody. So we have huge loss in human potential of both men and women in terms of taking that. But right away, with that kind of bottleneck right there, the best we could hope to do if all of those students that have taken that grade 12 physics are equally interested and equally motivated to take engineering, we're going to be looking at about 34%. Waterloo now is at about 36%. So we really have to uncover some of the other sort of social issues around the way we portray who are celebrities, who are people that are highly valued in our world, and things like that. And so it's much deeper kind of mindsets about who we are in the world and our roles in the world. And, I must say that Elsie McGill was the very first woman who graduated in electrical engineering, 1929 from U of T. She went on to be the very first professional engineer who was a woman in this country, and really led some of the development for the war around the design and building of the Hawker Hurricane for World War II. At that time, she was a celebrity for Canada. There was comic books written. She was called the Queen of the Hurricanes. So some of the role models then were quite different. Today, when we think about the people that we really value, the influencers and stuff, it's very, very different in terms of the fame, some of these attributes that are in some sense a little bit superficial versus, from my perspective anyway, in terms of the things we value. And so I do think we need to think more deeply about where are those gaps and barriers and how can we overcome them as a country so that we can realize the full potential of all of our youth into the future.
We have now another question that we can go to.
Hi, my name is Rowan Pratt. My pronouns are they, she. I'm studying industrial engineering at Dalhousie University, and I'm also the president of Engineers Canada. So my question is for the warden. The engineering profession has evolved significantly over the past 100 years. Given the modernization of the Iron Ring ceremony, are there plans in place for continuous improvement and reevaluation of the obligatory ceremony to reflect the future society as the profession continues to evolve?
Len.
Certainly, there is. Just going through the process made us realize, as was stated, I think, by both Mary and Pal, the notion of evolution, right? You can't just stay and stand still where you are and be happy and comfortable and say, that's it, we're done. Of course, things evolve. Society will evolve. Technology will evolve. We're aware of that more than ever. So we have a standing committee now in the Corporation of the Seven Wardens for ritual review. It used to be called ritual review. Now it's the calling of an engineer ceremony review. And this will, on a constant basis, look around, poll the field, speak both offline and formally with all of the stakeholders I mentioned, who are well represented today, like the regulators, like the deans, student body, and the general public, so that if new ideas and notions come up to our attention that are worthwhile of consideration and then of incorporation into the ceremony, by all means. I think, having gone through this process now, we realize not only the importance of evolution and of keeping it modern, but the ease with which it can be done, especially now, because we have the tools in place, the mechanisms are in place now to be able to incorporate changes and to even add to it. Now, that being said, I think we're okay for the next few months and most likely for the next few years. But certainly, we're always going to be willing and open for change. And in fact, we have now a social media presence. We're going to be that much more closely in touch with groups like Engineering Canada and the Engineering Deans of Canada and the students group, Canadian Federation of Engineering Students, in order to make sure that they are, very happy and cognizant of the fact that we're very willing and able to make changes as required.
Well, Pal,
Sorry, I was
Len,
just gonna.
and
Sorry, I was just gonna add to this probably make Mary happy. There's been when you look at Newton's first law of motion, objects at rest stay at rest, which may have been a charge laid against the corporation in the past, but objects in motion stay in motion. And I think we've seen that the camp of the Corporation of Seven Wardens has done great work, and I'm thankful to everybody who worked on modernizing their ceremony. I think that it's going to stay in motion, and it sounds that that's the way we want it to be.
Mary, final word to you.
Well, again, I'm so excited to attend the new ceremony, and I really appreciate the wardens and the approach they've taken with the, extensive consultation and listening to all the different stakeholders. And I'm just really excited about the new ceremony. I continue to be a very, very proud Canadian engineer, and I continue to wear my ring with pride. And I'm so looking forward to attending the modernized ceremony.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Len. Thank you, Pal, for an informative, for an illuminating discussion. I hope that the folks who had a chance to watch, and I know they did, I'm sure they appreciated your words and also have been inspired by what you've said and see engineering as being a possible landing spot for them as they make their way, their own journey through life. So thank you all very much. And I think we're now ready for our question and answer session. And so if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We have a question here from Ken McVeigh, who says, having worked as an engineer in the US in the past, I really understand the uniqueness of the iron ring in Canada. In this modernization process, could this uniqueness of Canadian engineering and innovation be highlighted? Leonard, perhaps I can pose that question to you.
Well, the uniqueness of Canadian engineering is evident in so many things that no reason to assume that this will end. Our profession is stronger than ever and continues to achieve on an international scale with technologies using every tool at hand, including AI, including some of the most advanced knowledge and technologies in hydroelectric facilities, in small nuclear power station development. So absolutely, I would think that on an international scale and moving forward, Canadian engineering is extremely well placed.
We have another question here from Walter Turchin, and the question is, how do our ethical and moral commitments possibly conflict for engineers who are employed in industries that design and manufacture weapons and other technologies that could be used offensively, not just defensively? Mary, I'm going to ask you to address that question.
Well, thanks, Adrian, for probably a very, very difficult question. I think, weapons production is, I think it's very complicated. I think there's a couple of sides to, every story. In one viewpoint, you could argue that it is ethical, because if you are going to produce weapons to defend yourself, your country, your property in some cases, then that is okay. I'm not saying that that's my personal view, but that is an argument that can be put forward. And on the other hand, other people would argue that the development of anything that would be purposely done to, hurt or destroy life is completely unethical and shouldn't be done. So I think it's nuanced. I think, when we look in history at people like Einstein, even Oppenheimer and stuff, they were scientists that, used their knowledge that led to the production of some of the most horrific weapons we have, and they were very conflicted by it. And I think they lived a life of conflict in terms of the role they had played in hurting humanity when that wasn't their original intent. So I'm not an ethicist or a philosopher, so I think I would like to hear from some of them, but I think it's very, very complicated, and I don't think there is an easy answer to this. I mean, we can see in the world today that, you know, I feel Canada should be building up their military a little bit so we can defend ourselves from hopefully not our imperialistic neighbor too much, but so they're so much bigger than us. But I mean, I just think that it's very complicated, and Adrian, maybe somebody else can weigh in on this as well. I don't have an easy answer for this. So,
well, pal, I'm not sure if you're a philosopher, but I'm going to ask you to answer the question anyway.
Yeah, no, it's extremely tough question. You know, I'm a former Canadian military officer, a combat engineering officer, and you know, use of force in any type of way. We've talked about defensive force and offensive force, but really, when it comes down to using military might, it's an extension of policy. And as a result, you know, the decision makers at the political level decide whether we're going to engage defensively or offensively in order to protect the national interest. And when you look at developing weapons, you know, weapons are as Mary said, they're destructive, and they have potential to really injure people and the environment. You know, this is that interesting question of public interest. I talked about this during this. What is the public interest? And in the end, it comes down to the ethical dilemma for engineers that do not see useful purpose in the research and development around creating weapon systems to protect the public interest. Then they have to touch that iron ring and say, this is not the realm that I believe my skills and my knowledge need to be used, because I do not believe that this is in the public interest. We are complex individuals. We all have, though we have similar value sets, we have, you know, raised on our upbringing and raised by the environments we're in. We each approach problems differently. And this is for each individual to look upon their obligation as an engineer, as a citizen of the world, and decide whether this is something they want to get involved in or not. And lots of people do not, and some decide they do.
Here's a question from Rowan Bapti. Rowan says, I'm an engineering student who will be attending the ceremony in a couple of years when I graduate. The ceremony is very important to my family and was first attended by my great-grandfather in 1947. I'm wondering how this new ceremony will honor the traditional ceremony and how it will continue to make engineers feel connected to their familiars and to the historic profession while still moving forward. Leonard?
Well, as I think I mentioned prior, the new ceremony incorporates what we believe to be the best elements of the original ceremony going back 100 years in order to maintain our tradition. There are relics at every ceremony. These are typically an anvil and a hammer and some chains, which have been used in industry sometimes for 30, 50, 80 years or more as part of the ceremony. To start the ceremony, we tap on the anvil 7 times to remember the original 7 wardens who created the ceremony. I think there is a lot of, and the original oath and the calling today incorporates much of the original language, which really emphasizes the things that have been stated here today as most important to all engineers, to do their best, to protect society, to support and work together with their fellow engineers. And that continues moving forward. So I think there's a really good balance that we've achieved with the new calling of an engineer ceremony from the past 100 years ago right to today and moving forward.
Here's a comment and question from Gerald, and I think his last name is Gengi. I'm happy to hear that the engineer's obligation is acknowledging social and moral context. My concern is that graduate engineers may not be getting the depth of ethical education that would help them build sufficient depth of understanding in their moral obligation. For example, I've looked at several schools in Ontario and see the education leans heavily into passing the NPPE. Since ethical behavior is both codified and has aspirational intent, could the presenters speak to integrating into the ethics education a deeper understanding of social moral behavior beyond the codes? Mary?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good point and a good question. I think that, this speaks to perhaps the accreditation systems we use right now, which have kind of minimum requirements around the exposure to, things like natural sciences, design, et cetera, et cetera. And so we still have very, very dense programs. And I agree, there is not much room to add in some of these other important complementary studies around ethics, philosophy, et cetera. And in fact, we don't even mandate, the amount or the type. We do leave it up to the student's choice a little bit in terms of what some of the complementary studies are. One thing I have seen that is a change is that when we get our students to work on projects, these are often no longer just kind of hyper-focused projects on one bit of technology that's disconnected from society, but we challenge the students more and more to think about kind of these wicked problems that are very, very societally facing, where there are complex issues. There's no right or wrong answer. And I must say the students don't like it very much. These are hard things where there is no right or wrong answer. It's not black and white. And it really forces them to speak to the stakeholders, to understand the issues from their perspective, and to try and design and develop technologies related to that. And embedded in that are the ethics of the society and the impact intended or unintended on that. It is a journey. So, I don't expect when they are graduating engineers that the depth of that knowledge will be with them, but I hope in kind of a continuous learning perspective that they will continue to learn and be guided and gain knowledge and expertise over time related to these matters. But I do hope with the futures of our engineering accreditation work, we will create more space in the future within our programs to embed more intentionally some of those issues around philosophy, around ethics, and to allow our students to be exposed to more of these kind of, wicked problems that are very, very societally facing.
Hal?
Yeah, a great question on the continuing evolution of ethics, with the foundation being set at university and it continues throughout your professional life. I know through the futures of engineering accreditation and the next steps right now that we are looking at what is in a program. Are we input based or are we output based when we decide what it is that an engineering student needs to know to move to the next level. I can say that in Engineers Nova Scotia and in other jurisdictions, there is connectivity between the higher education institutes and the regulator. And I know that our team here in Nova Scotia is constantly going and providing their thoughts and lectures and material on professional ethics, integrity in the practice of engineering. There are steps that are being taken to provide that knowledge that will provide a basis for students to continue their ethical journey in that sense. But I am looking forward to finding out what we are expecting for the engineer of 2050 to have as an ethical foundation. So right now there's good steps being taken to incorporate ethical thinking into project development and also the conceptual piece on what integrity in the profession means. And I'm looking forward for it to get codified and made more standard in all the programs.
We have a hard out in about 6 minutes, so I'm going to try and get to as many questions as I can in those 6 minutes. There's a question here from Harsh Sharma. Harsh says, I'm an immigrant senior engineer and recently achieved a P.Eng engineering. Am I eligible to earn an iron ring in a ceremony? Leonard.
Yes, you certainly are. What you need to do is contact the warden's section in your city, and they will provide information regarding what you need to provide as documentation. But if you become a graduate engineer here in Canada, there's absolutely no problem. In fact, anyone coming from outside of the country who can prove that they are an engineer with proper certification can apply to attend the calling of an engineer ceremony as well.
Here's another question, I think, for you, Leonard. It's from Jana Rosales, or Yana Rosales. And Yana says, will there be a way for the corporation to collect feedback from participants over the coming years on the revised ceremony? What kind of feedback would the corporation be interested in collecting? Are there further plans for continuous improvement?
Absolutely. As I think was mentioned during the panel talk, the recorded portion, we are in a state of constant evolution. There's a standing committee which will be constantly receiving feedback and input from anybody, especially from the stakeholders here today, whether Engineers Canada, Engineering Deans Canada, Canadian Engineering students, NG Queers Canada, Indigenous groups. We are more than willing and wanting to receive input in order to evolve. I think the overall exercise of the past 2 years has shown us that this is a positive and enriching experience for us, and certainly for anyone who's already undergone these ceremonies. We've had a few test runs, as it were. The main launch of the new ceremony is next month in Montreal on the exact 100th anniversary date. But I think we're very happy with what we have now. We're very encouraged with the new ceremony, and we'll be certainly on an ongoing basis receiving feedback and input on our website, on our social media, to improve even more.
Well, I'm sure all of you will be happy to know that there's someone in our audience who's interested in renewing her vows with engineering. Dominique Sorel asks, would there be a way for engineers who have already received their ring to renew their vows with this updated, more inclusive ceremony, especially for women?
Absolutely, Dominique. In fact, well, not all ceremonies or all cities have such a ceremony in place where it's specifically designed for renewal of vows. Often it's at a 25th anniversary or some such milestone. But what you need to do is contact the section, the camp in your city, and apply to become part of the ceremony or the next ceremony happening in your city. And I'm certain you will be accepted, and you will find it to be an enriching experience.
We have just about a minute to go, and so I just wanted to go around and at our panel here and just get some final thoughts from you. So perhaps Mary can begin with you.
Sure. Well, on the panel, I'd said I was about to attend the ceremony, and I have now attended the ceremony, and I must say, it was, again, heartwarming. I was so proud to be a Canadian engineer, and thank you so much to the wardens and everybody else that has modernized the ceremony and evolved it into this, so much better ceremony, so much more inclusive. And so thank you so much. And I hope it makes all of the engineers in Canada proud to be Canadian engineers. And, Len, now that you've put that thing out there about doing a re-obligation ceremony, we may be inundated with people that want to renew their obligation. And I think that's wonderful because you can never have too much commitment to your ethical obligations as an engineer.
Hal?
Thanks, Adrian. First of all, being invited to attend this panel, made me do some really serious thinking on the Iron Ring. It sort of becomes part of your life, and it becomes ingrained, and you've accepted it as part of your being and the way you conduct yourself. But really assessing going back to first principles and thinking what the ring really meant to me and why it meant to me and why it's important for the future, really re-energized me and sort of reinvigorated me on what it is I do as a professional engineer and my obligation to help the next generation of professional engineers. So I really appreciated the opportunity. You know, there's so many engineers out there, and we all have very complex thoughts. I think what the wardens have come up with is a very good solution, and we'll continue to make it better and better as time goes on.
Thanks, Paul. Leonard, final words to you.
Well, you know, I live and breathe the calling of an engineer and the iron ring just about every minute of every day in so many different aspects and elements, both administrative and functional and all. But as I said before, it never gets tired to stand up in front of a group of candidates who've just recited their obligation and to see them proudly wearing their ring, beaming faces, and their families thrilled with what they've achieved. And the notion that hopefully every one of these people will get up every morning and can't wait to get to work or to do something in their work regarding engineering. I think it's fantastic, and that's what the calling of an engineer ceremony, that's what the iron ring represents to us so personally and intimately as part of the corporation of the Seven Wardens and managing these ceremonies, but the giving back to society, doing the best you can, and of having fun and doing what you love to do every day. It's what engineering is all about.
Well, Leonard Shera, Pal Mann, and Mary Wells, thank you so much for your engagement in this session, but also thank you for your leadership, the leadership that you've demonstrated over many decades. So thanks so much. We really, really do appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks very
Adrian.
much. Thank you, everybody.
And
Take
we'd
care.
also like to thank you, our audience. Thank you so much for your questions and the comments. If you have any additional comments, you can send them to belongingandengagement@engineerscanada.ca. Again, if you have any more questions that you'd like to ask, you can send those questions to belongingandengagement@engineerscanada.ca. Well, to close things off for this afternoon, I'm now going to turn to Philip Rizkallah. Philip is the Chief Executive Officer of Engineers Canada. He has been a transformative voice in the public service for over 3 decades. Prior to joining Engineers Canada, he was appointed as Canada's first Chief Executive Officer and Deputy Head of Accessibility Standards Canada. Philip.
Thank you, Adrian, very much. First of all, thank you very much to the panelists, Pal, Mary, Lynn, for doing such a great job answering some tough questions. And, you know, speaking the truth and speaking from the heart in some cases. Adrian, I want to thank you as well for moderating a great panel. I understand this is the 4th time you've done this, or you've moderated or MC some events for us. You're very provoking and excellent management of this panel, you know, led for a very, very interesting event. Most importantly, I'd like to thank the crowd, the audience that actually came and sat through this for the last hour and a half and posed some wonderful questions for the panelists. Now more than ever, I'd like to say that the Iron Ring ceremony is truly Canadian. It is an event that is very unique to us. It's a sense of pride. It is something that I think we should be very, very proud of to receive the Iron Ring, and be very, very proud to wear it and say this is truly Canadian. I want to thank everybody for their effort in the event today. I wish you all the best going forward. There are a lot of events taking place in National Engineering Month this month, and I'd encourage you to go on our website, engineerscanada.ca. NEM, and look at all the events that the universities are holding. Some of them industry are holding as well, and participate in those events. I'll leave you with one other item, which is that in May we're holding a 30 by 30 conference in Vancouver. You know, this here will promote women in engineering and marginalized groups within the profession, and I would encourage you to try to attend the event, either virtually or in person, on May 21st in BC. Thank you again for this session, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.